She took a bundle of straw from the attic and tossed it into the hollow, intending to sit down. But feeling uncomfortable, she untied the twine, spread the straw out, and lay on her back, hands behind her head, legs stretched out. Without realizing it, she closed her eyes, sinking into a sweet stupor, and was on the verge of dozing off when suddenly someone's hands grabbed her roughly by the chest. She sprang up. Before her stood Jacques, a tall, broad-shouldered Picard, a farmhand who had been courting her of late. That day he had been working in the sheepfold, and seeing Rosa lying in the shade, he had crept up silently, holding his breath, eyes ablaze. Bits of straw were tangled in his hair. He tried to kiss her, but she, no weaker than he, slapped him hard across the face. Jacques feigned a plea for mercy. They sat down side by side and began a friendly conversation. They talked about the weather, favorable for sowing, about how the year promised a good harvest, about the master, a decent fellow, about the neighbors, the local countryside, themselves, their native villages, youth, childhood memories, and the parents they had left behind long ago, perhaps forever. Rosa grew sentimental at the thought, while Jacques, consumed by desire, edged closer, trembling with longing. "I haven't seen my mother in ages," she said. "It's hard, living like this apart." Her eyes gazed thoughtfully into the distance, as if through all the space that separated her from the faraway northern village. Suddenly he wrapped his arm around her neck and tried to kiss her again, but she clenched her fist and struck him so hard that blood spurted from his nose. He stood up and leaned his head against a tree. Rosa softened, came over, and asked, "Does it hurt badly?" He laughed. "No, just a scratch," though the blow had landed squarely. And, looking at her with admiration, he whispered, "Ah, damn it," feeling for the first time a sense of respect and something more, the beginning of real love for this strong, healthy girl. When the bleeding stopped, he suggested they take a walk. He was wary of her fist if they stayed seated. But she herself took his arm, as betrothed couples do when strolling down an evening lane, and said, "It's not right, Jacques, that you despise me." He protested. No, he didn't despise her. He was simply in love. "So you agree to marry me?" she asked. He hesitated, then glanced at her sideways while she stared vaguely into the distance. Her cheeks were full and rosy, her chest high beneath the calico bodice, her lips large and fresh, and beads of sweat glistened on her bare neck. Desire surged through him again, and leaning close to her ear, he whispered, "Yes, I agree." Then she wrapped both arms around his neck and kissed him so long that they both lost their breath. From that moment on, a typical love story unfolded between them. They frolicked in hidden corners, arranged moonlit meetings behind haystacks, and under the table gave each other bruises on the shins with their heavy, iron-shod boots. But soon Rosa began to notice Jacques growing cold. He avoided her, didn't speak, didn't seek her out. Doubts and deep sadness overtook her. And after a while, she realized she was pregnant. At first, she was seized by fear, then by anger that grew day by day, for Jacques stubbornly avoided her. Finally, one night, when everyone on the farm was asleep, she stepped out barefoot, wearing only her underskirt, crossed the yard, and pushed open the door to the stable, where Jacques slept above the stalls in a large box stuffed with straw. Hearing her footsteps, he pretended to snore, but she climbed up to him, knelt, and began shaking him until he sat up. "What do you want?" he asked. She, trembling with rage, teeth clenched, said, "I want you to marry me. You promised." He laughed. "Come on. If you had to marry every girl you sin with, what would that be?" But she grabbed him by the neck, threw him onto his back, held him down, and squeezing his throat, shouted, "I'm pregnant, do you hear? Pregnant!" He gasped, choking. They froze in the black silence of the night. Only the sound of a horse nearby, pulling straw from a manger and chewing it lazily, could be heard. Jacques realized she was stronger than him and muttered, "All right then. If that's how it is, I'll marry you." But she no longer believed his words. "Today," she said, "arrange for the banns to be announced." He shrugged. "Today it is, then. Swear by Almighty God." He hesitated, but finally, submissively said, "I swear by Almighty God." Then she unclenched her fingers and walked away without another word. Several more days passed, but she couldn't speak to him again. He now locked the stable, and she didn't dare make a scene, fearing scandal. One morning, she saw a new stable hand arrive for breakfast. "Has Jacques left?" she asked. "Sure," he replied. "I'm in his place now." A tremor seized her so violently she couldn't lift the cauldron from the stove, and when everyone left for work, she went up to her room and wept, burying her face in the mattress so no one would hear. During the day, she tried to find out something without arousing suspicion, but the thought of what had happened weighed so heavily on her that it seemed everyone she asked was secretly laughing behind her back. Still, she learned nothing, only that Jacques had truly left the area. From that moment on, her life became unending torment. She worked mechanically, without thinking, her mind circling around a single thought. What if they find out? This obsessive fear robbed her of reason. She didn't even try to avoid the shame that loomed ahead, though she felt it approaching with the certainty of death itself. Each morning, rising before anyone else, she stared with fierce anxiety into the shard of broken mirror where she combed her hair, asking herself the agonizing question, will they notice today? And throughout the day, she would stop her work again and again to glance down at her apron. Was it bulging too much from her rounded belly? The months passed, one after another. She spoke to almost no one, and if someone addressed her, she grew confused, frightened. Her gaze turned vacant, her hands trembled. "Poor girl, you've grown so dull lately," the master would say. At church, she hid behind a column and no longer dared go to confession, terrified of facing the priest, whom she believed could see straight into her soul. At the table, under the eyes of her companions, she froze with fear. She was constantly haunted by the thought that her secret would be uncovered by the stable boy, a sharp, cunning lad who never took his glittering eyes off her. One morning, the postman brought her a letter. She had never received a letter before and was so bewildered she had to sit down. What if it was from him? She couldn't read, and the ink-covered paper filled her with dread and awe. She hid the letter in her pocket, afraid to entrust her secret to anyone, but kept interrupting her work to gaze again and again at the neat lines ending in a signature, hoping the meaning might somehow reveal itself. At last, unable to bear it, she went to the schoolteacher. He invited her to sit and read aloud. "Dear daughter, I write to inform you that my health is failing. Our neighbor, Godfather Danthus, has agreed to write this letter so that you may come, if you can." Since the day had turned out to be unusually clear, the farmhands finished their lunch quicker than usual and soon headed out to the fields. Maid Rosa remained alone in the spacious kitchen, where the last ember was dying out beneath the cauldron of hot water in the hearth. From time to time, she ladled water and slowly washed the dishes, glancing at two dazzling squares of sunlight that fell through the window onto the long table. In those bright patches, every flaw in the glass became visible. 3 bold hens scurried beneath the chairs in search of crumbs. Through the half-open door drifted the smells of the barnyard and the warm vapors of fermented manure. In the sultry stillness of noon, the rooster's songs could be heard. When the girl finished her chores, wiped the table, cleaned the hearth, and arranged the plates on the tall dresser at the back of the kitchen, beside the loudly ticking wooden clock, she sighed, feeling, without knowing why, a weariness and slight malaise. She looked around at the blackened clay walls, the soot-stained ceiling beams from which hung tatters of cobwebs, smoked herrings, and bunches of onions. Then she sat down, nauseated by the stale vapors rising on this hot day from the packed earthen floor, saturated over the years with spilled odds and ends. Mixed in was the sharp scent of dairy products settling in the cool of the adjoining room. Rosa picked up her sewing, as she usually did, but was overcome by weakness and stepped out onto the threshold to breathe some fresh air. Under the gentle rays of the sun, she felt better. A sweet warmth seeped into her heart, and a pleasant languor spread through her body. From a manure pile by the door rose a light steam, sparkling in the sunlight. The hens lay sprawled atop the heap, scratching at it with one leg to uncover worms. Among them stood out a magnificent rooster. Every few minutes, he would select one of the hens and circle her with a soft, inviting cluck. The hen would reluctantly rise and, with an air of indifference, accept him, balancing on her wings and folding her legs beneath her. Then she would shake the dust from her feathers and settle back onto the pile, while he sang, as if tallying his conquests. From all the neighboring yards, other roosters echoed his calls, as if passing love challenges from farm to farm. Rosa watched them, her mind blank. Then she lifted her gaze and was blinded by the brilliance of the blooming apple trees, white as powdered wigs. Suddenly, a young foal galloped past her, mad with joy. Twice he raced along the tree-lined ditches, then stopped abruptly and looked around, as if surprised to find himself alone. She too felt the urge to run, to move, but at the same time was drawn to lie down, to stretch out, to surrender to the stillness of the hot air. Hesitantly, she took a few steps, eyes closed, overcome by a purely animal bliss, and quietly made her way to the poultry yard to collect eggs. There were 13. She gathered them, brought them into the house, and hid them in the cupboard, but again felt unwell from the kitchen odors and went out to sit on the grass. The farmyard, encircled by trees, seemed to be asleep. The tall grass, where yellow dandelions burned like little flames, was lush and spring-fresh. The apple tree shadows lay in perfect circles at their roots. The straw roofs of the outbuildings, on whose ridges irises had grown with sword-like leaves, gave off a faint haze, as if the dampness of the stables and sheds was evaporating through the straw. Rosa stepped under the awning where carts and carriages were usually kept. Nearby, in a ditch, was a large green hollow overgrown with violets, whose fragrance spread far and wide. Beyond the slope, the fields opened up, a vast plain of crops, dotted here and there with clumps of trees, with groups of tiny, doll-like workers flickering in the distance, and with white, toy-like horses pulling a child-sized plow, pressed upon by a man no taller than a fingertip. Signed on behalf of your loving mother, Cesar Danteus, deputy to the mayor. She said nothing and walked away in silence. But as soon as she was alone, her legs gave way. She sank down at the edge of the road and sat there until nightfall. Upon returning to the farm, she told the master of her sorrow. He let her go for as long as she needed, promising to assign her tasks to a day laborer to take her back into service afterward. Her mother was dying and passed away the very day Rosa arrived. And the next day, Rosa gave birth in the 7th month. The child was tiny, frighteningly thin, almost skeletal. His painful, spasmodic movements, his pitiful little hands, thin as crab claws, inspired dread. But he survived. Rosa said she was married, but couldn't care for the child, and left him with neighbors who promised to look after him. Then she returned to the farm. From that moment, a new, previously unknown love was born in her long-tormented heart. Love for this fragile, distant creature she had left behind. But that love became a fresh torment, hourly, minute by minute, because she was separated from him. A mad longing to hold him close, to kiss him, to feel his warmth against her breast tormented her with particular cruelty. She stopped sleeping at night, thought of him all day, and in the evening, after work, would sit by the fire and stare into space like someone whose thoughts were far away. People began to whisper about her, teasing her about her beloved. Surely, she must have had one. They asked, was he handsome, tall, rich? When was the wedding? When the christening? These questions pricked like needles, and she often ran off to cry in solitude. To escape the mockery, she threw herself into work with fierce resolve. Always thinking of the child, she tried to save as much money as she could for him. She decided to work so hard that the master would be forced to raise her wages. Gradually, she took over the entire household. The day laborer was dismissed, no longer needed, since Rosa now worked for two. She economized on everything: bread, butter, candles, grain once generously tossed to the hens, feed once lavishly given to the livestock. She guarded the master's money as if it were her own. She knew how to bargain well, sell produce at high prices, expose the tricks of peasants trying to cheat. She alone handled buying and selling, assigned tasks to the farmhands, kept inventory of provisions. Soon, she became utterly indispensable. Under her supervision, the farm began to flourish. People spoke of Cousin Valen's hired girl for miles around, and the farmer himself would say, "This girl's worth her weight in gold." Meanwhile, the months passed, and her wages remained unchanged. The master saw her diligence as natural as ordinary loyalty from a worker, and she began to understand bitterly. Though his income had grown by 50, even 100 ekis thanks to her labor, she still received the same 240 francs a year, not a sou more. She resolved to ask for a raise. 3 times she approached the master with that intention, but each time lost her nerve and began speaking of something else. It felt shameful to ask for money, as if there was something degrading in it. But one day, while the farmer was breakfasting alone in the kitchen, she, a little flustered, said she wanted to speak about her affairs. He looked up in surprise and placed both hands on the table. In one, a knife pointing upward, in the other, a piece of bread. Under his steady gaze, she faltered and, instead of asking for a raise, said she needed a week's leave. She wasn't feeling well and wished to go home. He agreed at once and, slightly embarrassed, added, "I'll need to talk to you too, once you're back." The child was nearing 8 months. She didn't recognize him. He had turned pink, round-cheeked, plump, like a living lump of lard. Quietly, with a contented laziness, he moved his chubby, splayed little fingers. She rushed to him with the hunger of a beast to its prey, and embraced him so fiercely that he burst into tears from fright. Then she too began to cry. The baby didn't know her, and reaching out his tiny arms, he clung to the wet nurse. But by the next day, he had grown used to her face and laughed when he saw her. She carried him out to the fields, ran like mad with him held high in her arms, sat beneath the trees, and there, for the first time in her life, though he could not understand, poured out her soul, spoke of sorrows, toil, worries, hopes, and wore him out with her passionate, frenzied caresses. It was endless joy for her to hold him, bathe him, dress him, even clean up after him when he soiled himself, as if this intimate care confirmed her maternal rights. She studied him, never ceasing to marvel. This was her child, and tossing him in her arms, she whispered with delight, "My baby, my own sweet baby." On the way back to the farm, she cried the whole time. And as soon as she crossed the threshold, the master called her in. She entered, surprised and anxious, not knowing why. "Sit down," he said. She obeyed. For several minutes they sat side by side, equally embarrassed, their hands awkwardly dangling, not knowing where to put them, not looking at each other, as often happens with peasants. The farmer, a stout man of about 45, twice widowed, stubborn and cheerful, was visibly flustered in a way unfamiliar to him. At last, he summoned his courage and spoke, hesitantly, staring out at the fields. "Rosa, have you ever thought about settling down properly?" Her face went pale. Seeing her silence, he continued, "You're a fine girl, steady, hard-working, thrifty. A wife like you would make any man happy." She still sat motionless, staring blankly at one spot, not even trying to grasp his words. Her thoughts tangled, as if some terrible threat loomed over her. He paused, then added, "You see, a farm can't run right without a mistress, even with a worker like you." He fell silent, unsure what else to say. Rosa looked at him with fear, like someone facing a murderer, ready to flee at his first move. Finally, after 5 long minutes, he asked, "Well, what do you say?" "What master?" she asked, not understanding. And he blurted out, "To marry me, damn it." She rose, but immediately sank back onto the chair, as if struck down, frozen, as though some great misfortune had befallen her. The farmer began to lose patience. "Come on now, what more do you want?" She looked at him in confusion. Then her eyes filled with tears, and twice, gasping, she repeated, I can't. "Why not?" he asked. "Enough nonsense. I'll give you until tomorrow. Think it over." He hurried away, feeling as if a weight had lifted from his shoulders. The conversation had burdened him, and now he was certain the maid would accept his proposal. For him, it was a practical arrangement, unexpected but sensible. He would bind to himself a woman capable of bringing him far more benefit than the richest dowry in the region. There could be no talk of inequality in such a marriage. In the village, everyone is more or less equal. The master tills the soil just like the farmhand, who sooner or later becomes a master himself. And maids often become mistresses. It changes neither their lives nor their habits. That night, Rosa didn't lie down. She sat on the bed and remained there, without even the strength to cry. She was like someone struck dead, motionless, numb to her own body, her thoughts scattered like one torn apart by a coarse comb. Only occasionally could she gather fragments of thought, and each time she did, terror gripped her at the mere idea of what might have happened. Her fears grew, and every time the heavy kitchen clock struck another hour in the sleepy silence of the house, Rosa broke out in a cold sweat. Her head spun, nightmare visions chased one another, the candle burned down, and then she was seized by that rural madness, when people are convinced they've been cursed. A wild urge overtook her to flee, to escape, to outrun disaster, like a ship fleeing a storm. An owl cried out. Rosa shuddered, stood up, and unconsciously ran her hand over her face, her hair, her body. Then, as if in a dream, she descended the stairs. Once in the yard, she crawled so as not to be seen by a passing stable hand. The moon, nearing its setting, flooded the fields with bright light. Instead of opening the gate, she climbed the embankment of the ditch and, stepping straight into the field, broke into a run. She rushed forward, erratic and breathless, and from time to time, without realizing it, let out piercing cries. Beside her, stretched along the ground, ran her large shadow, and overhead a night bird occasionally circled. Hearing her flight, the dogs on nearby farms began to bark. One leapt across the ditch and chased after her, ready to bite. But Rosa turned and howled with such a terrifying voice that the dog, frightened, bolted back, crawled into its kennel, and fell silent. Sometimes a litter of young hares played in the field, but at the approach of the mad fugitive, like a frenzied Diana, the timid creatures scattered. The mother and babies dove into a furrow, while the father fled at full speed. His bounding shadow, ears long and flickering, darted across the backdrop of the setting moon, which now sank below the edge of the earth, casting slanted rays across the plain, like a giant lantern placed at the horizon. The stars dimmed in the depths of the sky. Somewhere, birds began to chirp. Day was being born. Exhausted from running, Rosa could barely breathe. And when the sun broke through the purple veil of dawn, she stopped. Her legs, swollen from fatigue, refused to carry her further. Then she saw the marsh, wide, still, its water blood-red in the reflections of sunrise. Limping, clutching her pounding heart, she slowly made her way to the water. Sitting on a grassy mound, she removed her coarse, dust-covered boots, pulled off her stockings, and lowered her bluish feet into the stagnant moisture, where bubbles rose and burst on the surface. A delightful coolness spread through her body from soles to crown, and as she gazed into the depths of the swamp, dizziness overtook her, a mad desire to plunge in, to vanish. Here, her suffering could end forever. She no longer thought of the child. She wanted only peace, a deep, unbroken sleep. She stood, raised her arms, and took 2 steps forward. She was already waist-deep and ready to dive when a burning sting in her ankles made her recoil and scream. Long black leeches had latched on her legs, from knees to feet, swelling as they filled with her blood. She didn't dare touch them and howled in horror. Her desperate cries were heard by a peasant passing nearby. He tore the leeches off one by one, bound the wounds with grass, and drove the girl back to the farm in his cart. She spent 2 weeks bedridden, and on the morning she first came out to sit on the porch, the farmer suddenly appeared before her. "Well then," he said, "we've settled the matter, haven't we?" Rosa didn't answer. He continued to stand, piercing her with his gaze, and she barely managed to whisper, "No, master, I can't." He flared up. "What do you mean you can't, girl? Why?" She burst into tears and repeated, "I can't." He stared at her and shouted, "So you got a lover, is that it?" Shaking with shame, she murmured, "Perhaps. I do." He turned red as a poppy, choking with rage. "Uh-huh. So you admit it, you whore. Who is he? Some ragged beggar? A tramp? A scoundrel? Tell me, who is he?" She remained silent. "You won't say? Then I'll name him myself. Is it Jean Baudu?" "Oh no, not him." "Well then, Pierre Martin?" "Oh no, master. Beside himself, he began naming every local lad at random, while Rosa, downcast, kept denying each one, wiping her eyes with the corner of her blue apron. But he, with dull persistence, kept digging into her soul, determined to uncover the secret, like a hunting dog willing to tear at a burrow all day to reach the creature it had scented. Suddenly he exclaimed, "Ah, damn it! It's Jacques, the one who worked for me last year. I remember people saying he was always chatting you up, and that you two had promised to marry." Rosa gasped. A deep blush flooded her face. Her tears dried instantly, evaporating on her cheeks like drops of water on hot iron. She cried out, "No, it's not him, not him." "Oh, really? Are you sure?" asked the shrewd farmer, sensing a note of truth. She replied hastily, "I swear to you, I swear." She searched feverishly for something to swear by, afraid to utter anything sacred. He interrupted. Still, he was trailing after you everywhere, devouring you with his eyes at dinner. Come on, tell me, did you promise yourself to him? This time she looked him straight in the face. "No, never, never. I swear to you by Almighty God, if he came today to ask for my hand, I'd turn him away." There was such sincerity in her voice that the farmer hesitated for a moment. Then he spoke again, as if thinking aloud. "Then what's the matter? If something had happened to you, people would know. And if nothing happened, why would a girl refuse her master? No, something's being hidden here." She said nothing more, choking on sorrow and fear. He asked again, "So you won't?" She sighed, "I can't, master." Then he turned and left. Rosa thought she had managed to shake him off and spent the rest of the day in relative peace, though she felt so drained it was as if she herself, not the old white horse, had been turning the thresher's wheel since dawn. She went to bed early and fell asleep at once. Around midnight, she was awakened by hands groping at her bed. She started in fright, but recognized the farmer's voice. "Don't be afraid. Rosa, it's me. I came to talk." At first she was surprised, but soon understood what he wanted. He was trying to crawl under her blanket. A painful chill seized her. She felt defenseless, not yet fully awake, and completely naked beside a man who sought to possess her. Of course, she didn't want it, but her resistance was feeble, as if giving in to instinct, always stronger in simple souls. She found no protection in her will, nor in her body, too soft and yielding. She turned her face away, now toward the wall, now toward the room, trying to avoid the kisses with which the farmer pursued her lips. Beneath the blanket, her body twisted, exhausted by the struggle. He, drunk with desire, grew rougher and more insistent. With a sharp motion, he tore the blanket from her. Then she knew she had no strength left. Shamefaced, like an ostrich, she covered her face with her hands and stopped resisting. The master stayed with her all night. The next evening he came again, and then he began coming regularly. They started living together. One morning he said, "I've arranged for the banns. We'll be married next month." She didn't reply. What could she say? And she didn't resist. What could she do? She married him. It felt as though she had been pushed into a deep pit with sheer walls, impossible to climb, and above her loomed misfortunes, ready to collapse at the slightest tremor, like massive boulders. Her husband seemed to her a man she had deceived, and sooner or later he would realize it. And then her thoughts inevitably returned to the child, the source of all her suffering, yet the only joy she had on earth. Twice a year she went to visit him, but each time she came back more sorrowful than before. Meanwhile, habit took hold. her fears subsided, her heart grew calmer, and she began to trust life a little more. Only a vague unease still stirred within her. The years passed. The child was soon to turn 6. She was beginning to feel almost happy when suddenly her husband's mood darkened. For 2 or 3 years now, he had seemed troubled. Something gnawed at him, a growing inner concern, a persistent ache of the soul. He would often sit after lunch with his head in his hands, silent, lost in heavy thoughts. His speech grew heated, sometimes harsh. It seemed he harbored something against her, for at times he answered sharply, almost angrily. One day, when the neighbor's little boy came to the farm for eggs and she, busy with chores, greeted him curtly, her husband suddenly appeared and said in a bitter voice, "If he were yours, you wouldn't treat him like that." She froze, unable to respond. All her old fears surged back. At dinner, the farmer didn't speak to her, didn't look her way. She imagined he hated her, that he had found out everything. Utterly confused, she didn't dare stay alone with him after the meal. She left the house and ran to the church. Night had fallen. The narrow nave was steeped in darkness, but in the silence, near the choir, footsteps echoed. The sacristan was tending the lamp before the tabernacle. That trembling point of light, floating in the gloom of the vault, seemed to Rosa her last hope. She fixed her gaze on it and fell to her knees. The lamp, rattling its chain, rose upward. Soon, the sound of wooden clogs tapping on the stone floor, the rustle of a dragging rope, and the thin chime of the evening angelus rang out in the deepening dusk. As the sacristan prepared to leave, she approached him. "Is father at home?" "Most likely. He always dines at this hour," he replied. With trembling hands, she pushed open the gate to the rectory. The priest was about to sit down to supper. He immediately invited her to sit as well. Yes, yes, I know. Your husband has spoken to me. I know why you've come." The poor woman went cold. The abbé continued, "Well, what can we do, my child?" He hurriedly ate his soup, spoon after spoon, drops falling onto his cassock, stretched and greasy over his belly. Rosa no longer dared speak or ask or plead. She rose. The priest added, "Don't despair," and she left. She returned to the farm in a daze and saw her husband waiting for her. The workers had already gone to bed. Collapsing at his feet, she sobbed, "Why are you angry with me?" He began to shout, "Because I've got no children, damn it. A man doesn't take a wife to spend his life alone. That's why I'm angry. If a cow doesn't calve, she's no good. If a woman doesn't bear children, she's no good either." She wept, stammering through her tears. "It's not my fault. It's not my fault." He softened a little and muttered, "I'm not saying anything, but it's awfully frustrating." From that day on, one thought consumed her, to bear a child, a second child. And this desire she confided to anyone who would listen. A neighbor advised her to give her husband a glass of water each evening with a pinch of ash. He agreed, but it brought no result. They decided there must be secret remedies and began asking around. Someone pointed them to a shepherd who lived 10 leagues from the village. Uncle Vallon pawned the cart and one day went to seek his advice. The shepherd gave him a loaf of bread marked with strange symbols. Herbs had been kneaded into the dough. They were instructed to eat a piece at night, before and after intimacy. They ate the entire loaf, but nothing changed. The schoolteacher told them of secret love techniques unknown to the village and, according to him, unfailing. But they didn't help either. The priest recommended a pilgrimage to Fee Camp to venerate the holy blood. Rosa joined a crowd of pilgrims at the abbey, prostrated herself on the floor, and adding her prayer to the clumsy supplications pouring from peasant hearts, begged the one to whom all cried out to restore her ability to conceive and give birth. But it was all in vain. Then she decided this was punishment for her first sin. A deep sorrow overtook her. She withered from grief, and her husband aged, tormented by futile hopes. Longing has dried him out, people said. Hostility grew between them. He began to curse, to beat her. All day he tormented her, and in the evenings, lying in bed, choking with rage, he hurled insults and vulgarities at her. Finally, one night, not knowing how else to humiliate her, he ordered her to stand outside in the yard until dawn in the rain. When she refused, he grabbed her by the throat and began punching her face. She remained silent, unmoving. Enraged, he knelt on her belly and, teeth clenched, mad with fury, began to beat her mercilessly. Then, driven to despair, she rose up. With a wild motion, she flung him against the wall, sat up in bed, and spoke in a changed, whistling voice. I have a child. I do. I bore him with Jacques. You remember Jacques. He promised to marry me, but left. Her husband, stunned, shaken like she was, mumbled incoherently. What are you saying? What are you saying? She burst into tears and, through the torrent streaming down her face, whispered, That's why I didn't want to marry you. That's why. I couldn't tell you. You'd have cast me out with the baby, left us starving. You have no children. You can't understand. You can't. He repeated mechanically, more and more bewildered. So you have a child? A child. Sobbing, she said. You took me by force, you know that. I never wanted to marry you. He stood up, lit a candle, and began pacing the room, hands clasped behind his back. She still lay face down on the bed, crying. Suddenly, he stopped beside her. So, it's my fault we don't have children, he said. She didn't answer. He resumed pacing, then stopped again and asked, How old is your little one? Almost 6, she murmured. He asked another question. Why didn't you tell me? She groaned. How could I dare? He stood still. Well, get up, he said. She rose with difficulty, and when she finally stood, leaning against the wall, he suddenly burst into laughter, that warm, hearty laugh he used to have in happier days. But she still couldn't collect herself, and he added, Well then, we'll go get him, that child of yours, since we've none of our own. She was so frightened she might have run away, had she the strength. But the farmer, rubbing his hands, muttered, I was about to take in a foster child. Well, here he is, here he is. I even asked the priest to help find an orphan. Then, still laughing, he kissed his tearful, dazed wife on both cheeks and shouted at her, as if she were deaf. Well now, mother, go see if there's any soup left. I could eat a whole bowl. She put on her skirt. They went downstairs together. While she knelt to rekindle the fire beneath the cauldron, he strode around the kitchen, beaming, repeating, Well then, I'm truly glad. No lie, I'm really truly glad.